Hi everyone! Today I'm going to make a portrait with Casein, and it's going to be monochromatic, so I'm going to use ivory black and titanium white. So for my palette I'm using a tile, just a regular ceramic tile that I got at the hardware store for probably $1 or a bit less, because with Casein it is recommended to use a non-porous surface as a palette. So that's like one of the cheapest palettes I've ever bought, and I've got a much bigger one too that I got at the hardware store, and this one is smaller, and it's great when you make small paintings like this one that is in my sketchbook. So I'm using a Pantalic watercolor journal, which is 140-pound watercolor paper, and I'm also using some Velvet Touch watercolor brushes by Princeton. Now with Casein, it's also recommended to use synthetic brushes because the paint can be a bit harsh on the brushes. And actually I'm hoping that I didn't mess up those brushes because I really like them. I started my first layer very diluted with water, and just to establish all the different colors. So for the hat, I diluted the ivory black with a good amount of water, but not too much, so that the color can still stay pretty dark. So I'm making a portrait of Fred Astaire, which is one of my favorite actors, and I think it's just really funny. He's really talented, and I love how he dances, and Singing in the Rain is one of my favorite movies. For the face, I diluted the ivory black a lot more. I just wanted to establish the values, but very lightly, just to see where all the shadows were basically. And all the light areas I left white with the white of the paper. And when I get down to the suit, I did just the same as with the hat, where I still diluted the ivory black with water, but I put a lot less water. So when this was done, I started adding my second layer, and this time, at least for the hat, because it's very dark black, I barely added any water, just enough to move the paint, to make it flow on the paper. And for the highlights, instead of diluting the paint with water, like you would with watercolor, I added white. And I played with the black and the white to find the right values and find the right tones for the highlights as well. So while the paint is still wet, and you gotta be quite quick because the paint dries pretty fast, but while it's still wet, you can play and soften some edges and make it look nice and smooth. So that's what I did. Now, under the brim of the hat was pretty easy because it's just basically black. So I blocked it all with the black. Again, with just enough water to move the paint. And I used a thinner brush, a thinner round brush, to add a little bit of highlight on the edge of the brim. And for the suit, I did the exact same thing as for the hat. And I did add some white here and there for the highlighted areas. For the shirt itself, I used a bit more water. I didn't want the colors to be too harsh. So actually for the shirt on his chest, I basically left the white of the paper. I thought it looked really nice. It was a nice contrast between the white of the paper and the black of the suit. And for the white bow tie, I basically painted the shadows of it, and I get that with a mix of the black and the white, adding more or less black to the white depending on the depth of the shadow. I did the same for the color of the shirt. So because I did this painting in 2 sessions over the period of 2 days, I decided to clean my palette and put fresh paint on it, because if you wait too long and the paint dries, you can re-wet it, but you might not be able to get the desired effects. It's not as re-wettable as gouache is. It is re-wettable to a certain extent, but I just really wanted some fresh paint, so that's what I did, and that's why you see my palette being nice and clean. For my second layer on the face, I didn't go straight on with thick paint. I tried to establish the values again, the contrast, and I first put down all the whites, all the lighter areas, and then all the darker ones, and then I did the darker midtones, and then I really played, pushed back and forth, darkening the shadows and highlighting the lighter areas. Since I'm discovering the paint, I was really just playing around, trying to keep my eyes especially on my reference picture, and making sure I get the right blocks of colors, or grays I should say, in the right place. Once I was done with the second layer, I started using a thinner brush and added the details, like the black of the nostrils, the line between the lips and the eyes, especially the eyes. And it brought his face to life. And so I ended up with a good idea of all the values on the face, and that's when I realized that it was way too dark and I had to add a lot more highlights. So I worked on that, and I played again between the darkest darks and the lightest lights to a point where I was satisfied with it. So, like I said in my previous video, Casein is a very old medium. It's much older than oil paint, and it dates back to the 11th century. So it's not till the 1930s that it was put in tubes, and artists really loved it because it could be used instead of oil paint or with oil paints, often as an underpainting. But you know, it had a lot of different uses as well. It was used to paint buildings, and in the 40s and 50s, Casein was very popular as wall paint. So it's been a very versatile medium, and like with gouache in the mid-20th century, it was very popular, especially with graphic artists. But then it seems like it's been forgotten, and a lot of people have never heard of Casein these days. Which is a shame, really, because you can use it as watercolor, you can use it just like gouache. And actually, if you varnish it, it looks like oil paint. So it's really neat, and it dries really fast. You can clean everything with water. It's water soluble, so it's not a very messy medium. And I find it to be a very forgiving medium. I didn't think it was too hard to use it. Maybe because I've been practicing using gouache and it's very similar to it. The good thing about it is that it's not as water soluble as gouache, so when the layers dry, they don't move as much when you put another layer over them. So I found that it made it easier to paint with them. Bottom line is, I really love those paints. So if you've never tried Casein paint, you should give it a shot. Just grab a couple of colors and see if you like them, and let me know in the comments if you've tried them before, or if you have any tips for me on how to use them. As usual, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'll probably have more Casein videos coming up in the near future. Thank you all for stopping by. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you soon with another video. Bye bye.